Very good morning and welcome to another exciting edition of your weekly review and analysis program, Media Monitor. I'm Sakina Kamwendo and here's what you can expect from us this morning. We take a look at the major quotes and highlights from Malusi Gigaba's maiden budget speech to the nation, and we ask, was it what South Africans wanted to hear? We also delve into the NPA saga. 3 civic bodies approached the Constitutional Court to have former NPA boss Mxolisi Nxasana reinstated into his old position. And lastly, we take a look at embattled ministers who found themselves on the wrong side of the law. The North Gauteng High Court finding Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba lied under oath, and Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown was found guilty of misleading Parliament. Well, thanks so much for tuning in this morning. But before we delve into all of these very interesting discussions, allow me to introduce our panel of guests this morning. We have joining us, and the pleasure to welcome this morning, media analyst Shoni Makari. We also have Sunday Times political reporter Anita Hunter, SABC economics reporter Nompumelelo Siziba, and digital producer Tsepiso Moshe. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming through today.
Thank you very much.
And of course, before we delve into those stories any further, let's take a look at what's making headlines in the newspapers this morning. The Sunday Times, that's where we're going to start, and they leading with a story about 7 men who were killed and 10 arrested on Friday night after police received a tip-off that Seven Angels Ministries Church was hiding the killers who were responsible for the ambush on the local police station that claimed 6 lives on Tuesday night. City Press also leading with the same story about the leaders of the Seven Angels Ministry Church who are called angels by their members, and it's emerged that the alleged masterminds behind Tuesday night's massacre of 5 police officers and 1 retired soldier at the police station in the tiny Eastern Cape town of Ngobo were members of that church. The Sunday Independent, they're running with the story about former Gauteng Hawks head General Shadrack Sibiya, who has broken his silence, lashing out at rumors that he took 1 million rand in bribes from a veteran musician Silo Chico Twala in exchange for protecting his son Longwe from facing charges related to the murder of soccer star Senzo Meyiwa. The Sunday Tribune, they're running with the story about cops being massacred, bringing the number to 12 since the beginning of the year. The latest victim, a 54-year-old officer from Mapumulo, who was killed during a business robbery on Friday. And finally, the Weekend Argus and their lead story today, top managers in the city of Cape Town's Water and Sanitation Department have received salary increases, much to the displeasure of the South African Municipal Workers Union SAMWU, who called the pay hike insensitive given the city's water situation. And that's what you can look forward to in the newspapers this morning. But we're shifting gear and we're taking a look at the stories that are trending on social media and that have made the headlines this past week with Sepi. So please talk us through the major hashtags.
Morning, Sakina, and morning to the viewers at home. Sakina, our first big hashtag for today is the budget 2018. Now, Sakina, on Wednesday, Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba delivered the budget speech in Parliament, and among others, he announced that the VAT will go up. And Sakina, that didn't sit well with many South Africans, from politicians to ordinary South Africans. Some even took to Twitter to express their dissatisfaction. The first one is from Gift, saying VAT increase is not acceptable. Imagine how the possible 2% increase will have an effect on the poor and the less privileged. Hashtag budget 2018.
COSATU also continuing to express that displeasure. Dai Norman Mampane from COSATU there saying budget 2018, we demand cuts in politicians, MPs, ministers' perks, and there must be an end to driving German cars. Ministers' vehicles should not exceed 500,000 rand. If they want to drive German cars, they must pay from their own pockets.
Another one is from Ahmad saying, it will be interesting to hear what the finance minister has to say about the nuclear program going forward, hashtag budget 2018.
And of course, it was crickets when Malusi Gigaba delivered that budget speech with regard to the nuclear issue. But what else was making headlines?
Sakina, our second biggest hashtag is the Ngcobo shooting. Now, Sakina, on Wednesday, news broke out that 5 police officers and retired soldiers had been shot and killed in the Eastern Cape. And Sakina, that also generated a lot of commentary on social media. Others making comparison to the Senzo Mewa case, saying it's 2018 and nobody has been arrested or charged with the Senzo Mewa case. But when a police officer is shot and killed, police go all out to find the killers. Whether that is a fair or unfair comparison, it's for people at home to decide. But here are some of the views from ordinary South Africans. Here is the first one is from Dunge saying, if the police can find the killers of the Ngcobo shooting within 72 hours, why is it taking so long with the Senzo Mewa's case?
Well, police efficiency, I believe it was actually more like 65 hours, but all the same. Telly Earthgirl says, it's so sad that the police are killed doing their work, and wish people have heard you, as is important to heed your call and not engage in criminal activities. We are tired of brutal killings. Bigger.
The last one is from Mteto Mbata saying, Minister Ed Fikile Mbalula, please convert that Ngcobo shooting church into a community center so that they referring to the community, can benefit from this despicable deed under the guise of a church, hashtag Ngcobo.
And of course, many of the Sunday papers leading with that very story. Kanita Hunter, the Sunday Times, they also picked up on this particular story. It is a massive one. It is an assault on the state when people can find their way into a police station and just do the sort of deeds that they did. But, you know, what's your take, more broadly speaking?
There was something extraordinary about this story this week, particularly because of the nature of it, there were murders, but it was sort of assassination style, the retaliation then by the police in trying to arrest the suspects, and then the surfacing of this church, which, you know, has always been controversial, but now more details coming out. So the story is absolutely bizarre, almost sort of fictional if one looks at it. And I think that we are yet to see more information coming out about who the suspects are and what were the motives behind this sort of assassination style attempts or murders against those police officers that night.
And of course, where was the police intelligence? Why was there no intel? Why could this not have been prevented? All more questions that will be delved into, no doubt. And then the final hashtag this week?
Our final hashtag, Sakina, relates to the statement that President released on Friday, saying President Cyril Ramaphosa has withdrawn the president appeal against the judgment of the North Gauteng High Court that said NPA boss John Abrahams should vacate his office. And that also generated a lot of commentary, Sakina. The first tweet is from Rudolph saying, a very greatly decisive decision indeed. It clearly prevails the instrumental intellectuality of the president.
Interesting. Andele Lazi Somlibo says it's a good decision because it's a waste of taxpayers' money. Hence, we know that the state always loses every time they go to court. Ouch.
Our final one is from King David saying he made NPA useless for all these years with Jacob Zuma. He must face the music just like Zuma.
Well, and of course, our panel will be delving into that further. But thanks so much, Tsepiso. Those were the major hashtags for this week. And after the break, we'll delve into Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba's 2018 budget maiden speech. So don't go away.
I feel it's a real person.
And it's nutritious and delicious.
It's good. I really like it.
This celebrates being South African. We love our beer, we love our food, we love our music.
For knowing who you are going, you must know where you come from.
I'm excited to be part of this year.
For all your travel trends, catch us every Sunday, 12 midday on Channel 404.
And thanks for tuning in this morning. Well, it was a highly anticipated budget that was delivered by Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba, who's been accused of facilitating state capture himself. Now, for the first time in 25 years, the National Treasury decided to raise value-added tax by 1 percentage point from 14 to 15%. And due to the magnitude of Treasury's revenue shortfall, it seems they almost had no option. An amount of nearly 70 billion rand, some have estimated, for the 2018-2019 fiscal year. Trade Union Federation COSATU, they've called the VAT increase a slap in the face of the poor and the working class. And now the 2018 budget has been delivered. It's just a matter of days before Moody's will make their call on South Africa's credit rating. And we now talk to our business anchor, Nompumelelo Siziba, about what went down. And you were in Cape Town, of course, for that budget speech. And looking at what the trade unions have said, you've got COSATU speaking out there, as well as Nzima Vavi going a step further from SAFTU, and he called it an onslaught on the working class. What was your assessment?
Well, yes, obviously it was a very controversial call that Treasury made, but before the announcement it was widely believed among analysts that this would be the case, simply because the shortfalls, the revenue shortfalls were so huge. And yes, they can tinker with taxes here and there, but there was no way they were going to be able to try and draw the amount of money that they needed. So a 1 percentage point increase equates to something like 23 billion rand. So that was the easiest, most broad-based tax to levy, with some guarantee that you're going to get decent revenue from that. So on the one hand, that needed to happen, but then on the other hand, obviously there was going to be a backlash, particularly from Labour, about the impact. Deputy Finance Minister Sfiso Buthelezi claiming that in actual fact 85% of VAT revenue comes from the more wealthy rather than the people on the ground. Interesting assessment there.
Very interesting. What would he have based that on?
I have no clue. I really have no clue, but I'm quite surprised that he would say that. But it is definitely going to be detrimental because it means prices go up. It may even cause us to experience inflationary pressures, because we've had a very nice inflation picture coming out now. I mean, for the January CPI number, it came out at 4.4%, which is below the midpoint of the Reserve Bank's inflation target. So it's looking good, but there are lots of pressures sort of on the sidelines, possible higher oil prices. The rand will always be volatile. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of ratings agencies and so on and so forth. Mr. Ramaphosa talking the talk very nicely, but people are going to be watching very closely as to how soon he's able to deliver on the many promises that he's been making, because you can talk for a while and people will be excited and sentiment will be great, but if there are no results, then that might have some consequences for us.
And which brings us to one of the questions around this new South Africa. What is actually new in this new South Africa? Because if you think about it, yes, VAT, low-hanging fruit, easy, go for that. But this is a South Africa that seems to be almost averse to taxing business, taxing the wealthy any further. The apartheid government was actually more astute at doing that. They had no qualms about taxing business, and now you've got personal income tax higher than what businesses pay for tax. Why will government not go there?
I think there's a bit of a difficulty in the sense that we don't have many rich people. Right? There are rich people who are stinking rich, who actually accrue a lot of the income that we get in this country. But, you know, the arguments are if you levy tax too hard on them, they'll employ tax avoidance strategies, you know, there'll be capital flight and all of that. So you need to...
Don't we already have that?
We probably do. You have to strike that balance. And of course, as well, if you overtax the middle class, then you begin to... that's also a delicate area. So it's a bit of a fine balance. Look, there were some taxes that were levied on the rich. This ad valorem tax, basically it's for luxury goods. Yes, it rose from 7% to 9%. Also, the estate duty, it also went up from 20 to 25%. But you have to have assets in the area of about 30 million rand. I don't know how many South Africans have that. So there have been taxes levied on them, but I think it's always that thing, how hard do you go before you start getting that resistance where everybody's going to leave the country because, you know, the taxes are too high. There probably is an argument that more could be done. In terms of corporations, we've had a lackluster growth situation for a number of years. It doesn't make sense to target corporations, especially when our tax rate, which is about 28% corporate income tax, it's a bit higher relative to our country peers. So it makes us uncompetitive. People will rather take their business elsewhere because they're not going to face you know, such high levels of tax. So those are the things that have to be weighed up. But there's always an argument that more could be done, perhaps. I don't know.
I couldn't help but wonder whether the South African taxpayer, especially the middle class, as you point out, because they're being squeezed here, do we have any options? Is there something you can do? Can people come out and say, you know what, we refuse to accept that budget? I saw a petition doing the rounds yesterday with some 18,000 signatures already on it, saying that we refuse to accept this. Is there realistically something that the South African population can do?
Well, you're asking me a bit of a legal question there. I think, look, people do put out petitions and, you know, during this scourge of state capture that we've been having, people have been really irate saying, why should we pay, you know, taxes when our taxes, our hard-earned taxes are actually been guzzled by individuals, you know, the elite and all of that. But I think there would be consequences, you know, and on top of that, if you're earning an income, you have no choice really because, you know, the first port of call is SARS. They take what they need to take. So you can try and do what you like. Maybe if you're a business person, self-employed or whatever, you can try and dodge here and there. But I think that the way that the system is created, it's very difficult for you to take a stand at, you know, but I think if you have access to a lot of wealth and so on and so forth, you can employ strategies where your money goes elsewhere and you try and ensure that SARS and the like don't touch it.
And then you have the state-owned enterprises and the drain that they have become on the fiscus. Was that issue addressed in any meaningful way?
Well, yes, they've been a huge drain. I think the total amount that government has given them in terms of guarantees is something to the tune of 466 billion rand. That's nearly R500 billion. It's quite a lot. Some people estimate it's actually more. But so now they are a real risk because obviously what happens is that if one of them default on debt, it means all the creditors of all the various state-owned companies can come and say, hey, we want our money too, because they no longer have faith that these state-owned enterprises can actually honor their obligations. So they have the right. And because they have that right, it would mean government would have to suddenly find 500 billion rand to sort out all the, and of course that would just completely crush us as a country. It wouldn't be viable. So because it's such a risk, Malusi Gigaba did highlight it. But I felt there was no real clarity about what the strategy is. He was talking about modalities for later on. Come budget, people want to know what exactly is it that you're planning to do so that they can begin to have, you know, confidence. So, for example, the ratings agencies, I don't think they would have got a feeling that, oh, we know what's going to happen with the state-owned entities. He talked about government having assets of about 40 billion rand. They may sell a few to try and help finance some of the state-owned enterprises. He talked about possible equity injections in SOEs, but we know that part privatization or privatization of those is a bit of a no-no among, you know, the politicians and so on. So it wasn't clear what it is that they're going to do. I think people are going to be watching closely over the next 3 to 6 months as to what those modalities are. And if there's still no clarity, you know, this time next year, it's problematic because as we speak now, they continue to drain the fiscus.
Shoni Makari, also Malusi Gigaba himself being placed under the spotlight as the person delivering this budget speech with all of the allegations that he may have been a part of that facilitation process of state capture. What did you make of that?
Well, can I start by answering a question you asked earlier? Is there something that South African can do about this? Yes, of course there is. You can elect a new government, a different government, and you have that opportunity come next year. But we're going to give Ramaphosa a chance and see what he does. Of course, the issue is that Gigaba was between a rock and a hard place in terms of what he could deliver under the circumstances. But VAT, did he have to increase VAT? Not necessarily. He could have cut down government expenditure. You know, because one of the reasons he's not able to cut down government is because they want to continue feeding these useless state entities that could be restructured or part sold, and actually we spend less bailing out things that we shouldn't be bailing out. They could put people who know how to run government departments instead of deploying cadres who actually can run those departments a lot more efficiently. So there's a whole range of things. But unfortunately, unlike you and I, when we don't have money to do things, we cut down on our expenditure. Government doesn't. The only entities in the world that spend more than what they earn. And to me, that is the problem. So for me, Gigaba, as much as one could say he didn't have much room, he didn't really give an inspired budget. You know, it wasn't inspiring. It didn't really focus on things that we should be focusing on going into the future. It's more like stopgap measures. When are we going to come out of this, risk management mode in terms of how we run the government and actually do things that actually ensure that there is growth for the longer term?
If I may interject, well, government did say, or at least Malusi Gigaba did say, that Treasury was to cut expenditure by 85 billion rand over the medium term. However, I didn't get a sense of clarity as to where that's going to, where that's going to happen. But there does seem to be an intention to cut expenditure.
Not enough.
Just a quick one to Kanita about the jobs, the 1 million job opportunities that Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about. Where's that going to come from? We've heard these sort of lofty ideals before.
Yeah, I think that it's mostly interpreted as sort of political capital that he was seeking to get. It's coming to an election year. The economy is not doing well, as sort of pointed out. And so I think that people are going to really look at where are these jobs going to come from, and I think that it's easy to promise.
Well, we'll park the budget there for the time being, and when we come back, we hone in on the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shaun Abrams, and his future, of course, hanging in the balance, but more on that when Media Monitor returns.
Meningitis is a potentially deadly disease that affects more than 1 million people worldwide each year.
Well, it's an infection of the lining of the brain and the spinal cord. And it's caused by a variety of bacteria.
And also, importantly, with fungal meningitis, there's no transmission from person to person.
In South Africa and elsewhere in the world, the ministries of health, etc., have recognized this as an important disease to prevent. And vaccines have been introduced into immunization, routine immunization programs.
It's really important to prevent, and the best way to prevent is to have people know their HIV status, start antiretroviral treatment as soon as possible.
For all your health news, join Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
And you're watching Media Monitor. Thanks so much for tuning in this morning. Well, National Director of Public Prosecution Shaun Abrams is expected to make an announcement this week on whether former President Jacob Zuma will be prosecuted. This after receiving a memorandum of recommendations on Friday from the team that was tasked with recommending whether Zuma should be prosecuted on fraud and corruption charges. The Supreme Court of Appeal set aside the 2009 decision to withdraw the charges against Zuma, paving the way for a fresh fresh prosecution. However, Zuma submitted representations as to why he should not be prosecuted at the end of last month. Meanwhile, civil bodies, Corruption Watch, Freedom Under Law and the Helen Suzman Foundation launched a constitutional court bid to have former NPA boss Mxolisi Nxasana return to his post. Zuma awarded Nxasana a 17 million rand golden handshake in 2015 after a fallout. Now, the full bench of the High Court in Pretoria, which declared the appointment of Abrams invalid, set the decision aside and gave the then Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa 60 days to appoint the replacement. But more of that in this package.
It's been 9 years since this historic moment. The NPA dropped the charges against then ANC President Jacob Zuma, paving the way for his ascension to the highest office in the land. But nearly a decade later, former President Zuma's counsel conceded that the decision was irrational, essentially leaving the NPA in the same position it was in back in 2009, to prosecute or not to prosecute. The prosecution team was given until Friday to submit the recommendations to the NPA head.
The National Director will consider those recommendations and request the team to conduct to do a briefing for the entire leadership. That is, make a briefing to the National Director and his deputies. So the announcement won't be today, it won't be tomorrow, it won't be next week. They must apply their minds, and then after applying their minds, then they will articulate a date upon which an announcement will be made.
And even then, another possible delay, as Advocate Shaun Abrahams has to honour his commitment to the Council for the Advancement of South Africa's Constitution.
CASAC had written to the National Director indicating that they should be given about 2 weeks' notice before he announces his decision. And the National Director responded and acceded to that request, and therefore we'll have to honour that undertaking.
Abrahams appears unlikely to make the announcement before the Constitutional Court hears argument on his future. Next week, CASAC will lead evidence why the court should uphold a High Court ruling which declared a vacancy for the NDPP position.
We are hopeful that this will provide further clarity in terms of how the National Prosecuting Authority should deal with the decision to reinstate charges against Jacob Zuma.
Aldrin Simpier, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, to prosecute or not to prosecute, that is the question. So what are the possible scenarios that the NPA could come up with here, Juanita?
I think the first very important fact is the fate of Shaun Abrahams. That is the elephant in the room that has to be dealt with. We know that President Cyril Ramaphosa has withdrawn President Jacob Zuma's appeal of the decision of the High Court that is effectively sets aside Shaun Abrahams' appointment. So when that matter is heard in the Constitutional Court, I think that it would be absolutely interesting to see what the arguments are from Shaun Abrahams, who's still appealing the decision and has now put forward his own arguments. Effectively, his position and the decisions he has taken or will take is under scrutiny. So if he makes any serious decision, from now in the next 2 weeks, like CASAC said, it will, be scrutinized heavily. And that also, one of those decisions that needs to be made is whether President Jacob Zuma will face these charges or not. We know that the recommendation to him has been that he should face those 18 charges of 783 payments. And I think that President Jacob Zuma has been consistent in saying that he wants his day in court. I think that he is now a step closer to having that day in court. Hawks have confirmed this week that they've done everything in their power to secure the witnesses ready for the case. So it's a matter of Shaun Abrahams or whoever the new NDPP is appointed to make that decision to say the charges are now reinstated and the matter will be heard on such date.
Shawnee, quite apart from the legalities, there's also a lot of political and other outside pressure brought to bear on Shaun Abrahams as the NDPP and on the NPA as a whole with regard to the decision they arrive at in this instance.
Yeah, unfortunately so, because if we had an independent person, or at least one who appeared to be independent, it wouldn't have taken this long, for instance, to go after the Guptas with all the Gupta leaks out there available. So it looks like that office takes direction from political heads, and that really muddies the water completely. And
isn't it that sort of accusation that landed us here in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely.
With Zuma back in 2009, the fact that it was already speculated back then that these officers are being used to further political ends.
Absolutely. And if Zuma is innocent, why is he resisting to go to court and clear his name? It's as simple as that. The groups and everybody else, all the cases that are sitting on his desk that is really moving at a snail's pace on. You know, if those people are innocent, it should be simple. They should just go to court and clear their name. But of course, he's not doing that because, you know, he doesn't want to jeopardize his career. And don't forget, this is a young man. He's still under 40. With all the rubbish that has happened under his watch, I don't know who will want to employ him. You know, so I understand why, when first of all, he's fighting to, you know, hang on to his job because it's all over unless he has a, you know, wants to try his hand in pig farming or something like that.
But it's very complicated because now you have the civil society groups calling on the reinstatement. They're calling for the reinstatement of Mxolisi Nxasana, and we know the conditions under which he left office. So what's supposed to happen now?
I disagree with Johnny in the sense that Shaun Abrahams has been a career prosecutor. Up to the point he was appointed NDPP, he has had a remarkable, and no one can dispute that, sort of influence at the NPA and the sort of cases that he tasked. He was appointed in a poison chalice. There was a cloud over the position. The president is the one at blame, not to say Shaun Abrahams didn't do anything since his appointment, but the entire precarious nature of that position and the NPA as a whole has a lot to do with the highest office in the land, the former president, and the complications that came therein. So Shaun Abrahams is between a rock and a hard place. He's on his way out. He knows that because we've heard what the new president of the Republic said in his State of the Nation address, that he will be dealing with the leadership issues there at the NPA. So that is sort of a given now. I think now it needs to sort of look at a situation past this, and I think the State of the Nation was very good in that, to say that we need to fix you know, our institutions. We need to fix our crime fighting institutions in a way that's effective and gives it the teeth again. And I think it has, institutions in South Africa have been eroded, and now it's sort of a rebuilding process, and that's where the NPA comes in.
But within that rebuilding process, and I think we have a responsibility as the media to actually play the role of informing the public out there exactly what is going on and what the reasons are, quite apart from whims and fancies and popular narratives. Because what has Shaun Abrahams done that was wrong? Why does Shaun Abrahams not deserve to be in his position?
Shaun Abrahams doesn't deserve to be in his position because he was appointed under a cloud. The reasoning of how he was appointed was murky, particularly because the president needed to find a way out of the Nxasana matter and then looked onto this great up-and-coming prosecutor, and he was then appointed. He, unlike, you know, other people whose appointments were sort of had shadows on them, he didn't prove himself. He didn't step up to the occasion. You know, we can compare his situation.
What do we mean by that? What was he expected to do?
He was expected to do his job. He was expected to prosecute. He was expected to make firm decisions. He, you know, if decisions to arrest people in the Estina Dairy Project, if the Hawks are telling you on the record that we were ready in November, meanwhile, the NPA, you know, is still sort of baffling over their feet over what to do in the state capture matter. There's sort of a tit-for-tat happening on just that particular issue. There's you know, there's accusations that you know, sort of things were just left to linger, and it took some decisive leadership in the asset forfeiture unit to say no, we're stepping ahead regardless of what's happening. You look at a number of cases. If you look at the prosecution rate, just if you look at it very technically and leave the politics aside, when have we had a big conviction? It's been years since we've had a serious corruption, you know, a positive conviction. So I mean, he's been in his job since, you know, the last few years. You know, and I always think about it, and it may be a bit unfair, but I always maintain that if you look at someone like Chief Justice Mogoeng, he had more scrutiny than Shaun Abrahams getting into his job, but he stepped up to the occasion. He rose above and he did what he needed to do, and he does what he needs to do.
But on your own account, Shawnee, on Konita's own account, there is interference. The NPA does not seem to be left to its own devices to get on with the work of deciding on prosecutions and doing what they need to do. So how is it going to be different from the next person coming in? Because we saw Nxasana leaving and getting that golden handshake as well, and I want you to reflect on that as well. But, you know, until such time, of course, that this office is allowed to do its job, we're always going to have this problem that Shaun Abrahams is faced with now.
No, absolutely. And to the point you were making earlier that you know, he was doing a great job up until he got to be a national director. The bottom line is that he should have been a person of integrity and also provide the kind of leadership that is required to actually rise above the politics. He wasn't able to rise above the politics. And as a result, he allowed himself to be, you know, basically manhandled and taken to whichever direction that the political masters wanted. And to me, that is a major, major failing. Take an example, okay, totally outside of the public sector area. You know, you remember a guy called Jack Welch. He inherited a company, General Electric, that was going nowhere. He turned that company into a multi-billion rand corporation. Okay, come back to the public sector. He should still have done what would have brought some respect to that office. You know, take the Public Protector's Office before Thuli Madonsela's tenure. You know, we hardly had anything about it, but you know, she stepped up to the plate to her point earlier, and I don't think Shaun was able to do that. And post his tenure at the National Director of Public Program, I still don't see who would want to be associated with that. It's not what you did before. It's the reputation you accumulated right up to your last job or last project. And that's what people will remember.
And I think that's the critical point, where people need to step into their truth and their morality and do what is right. But the 17 million rand golden handshake to Mxolisi Nxasana.
Yeah, that's really put the country in a bit of a pickle because, you know, obviously, you know, he would resist giving back the money if he's not getting the job at the same time. And obviously, there's a lot of pressure to actually try and have him return that money. But to me, returning the money will set at least a very good precedent in this country that, you know what, we cannot buy our way out of problems. You know, he was a problem to her point earlier that, you know, there was that, you know, discomfort with him staying in office. So how do we take him out of office? We give him a fed paycheck. But I think he needs to return the money. I don't know if he'll be able to get his job back because, you know, that comes with its whole set of complications. But certainly returning the money will set a very, very good precedent that, you know, let's not try and buy our way out of trouble. Let's do things right the first time.
But let's rely on the court for these arguments. The courts have been very clear. The courts have ruled that Shaun Abrahams sort of, you know, didn't step up to the plate. That's court judgment. If you look at the Nxasana matter, the court has ruled that the president was conflicted in appointing Shaun Abrahams because he just wanted Mxolisi Nxasana out of the way. That's a ruling. That's a standing ruling of the court until further court rules otherwise. And so the issue of the 17 million and whatever, at the end of the day, the court made it not an obligation on the then deputy president, now the president, whatever the situation is, that that he will automatically get his job back. And I think Nxasana knows that. The court was very clear in that. But I do think that it's a step in the right direction in to say that that 17 million rand was effectively a cover-up. And if it was 17 million, because there's no clarity if it was that amount, it could be more. And so I think that NPA is just one example. There's a whole lot of other areas of you know, crime-fighting institutions and state-owned enterprises where the state is being drained to cover up things. And I think that, again, the optimism around this comes back to that particular very direct statement by Ramaphosa in his State of the Nation address, where he says this has to come to an end. And I mean, it's all well and good, but will he actually do the right thing? And who will he appoint to that position? That, for me, I'm looking at it so closely.
And of course, whoever is appointed into that position almost expected to reinstate those 18 charges, those 783 counts against former President Jacob Zuma. But more Media Monitor when we return.
corruption both in the public and the private sectors needs to be combated.
Where there are clear cases of wrong that has been done, that must commence immediately.
Something is being done about corruption in our
currency, even although it's strengthened dramatically after the ANC's recent elective conference, could conceivably go stronger yet.
He had a soul that would not be for sale.
Stay tuned to Your World for your final news roundup, Monday to Sunday at 21:30.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, one of the big news stories of the week was the North Gauteng High Court ruling that Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba lied under oath when he testified during his tenure as Home Affairs Minister in a case filed by a company that wanted to operate a private immigration terminal at OR Tambo International Airport. Fireblade Aviation, controlled by the Oppenheimer family, filed a lawsuit against Gigaba, alleging that he had reneged on a pledge to delegate officials to staff their immigration and customs facility that was to be developed at the airport on land rented from arms manufacturer Denel. Now, the Democratic Alliance got hold of the judgment shortly before he delivered his budget speech on Wednesday and circulated the damning findings on social media. And though Gigaba denied ever approving the terminal, the court ruled in Fireblade's favor, and he told journalists before delivering his budget speech that the decision of the court is being challenged. Another minister who was also caught lying is Public Enterprise Minister Lynn Brown. Now, the Public Protector report found that the minister misled Parliament when she said a consultancy firm linked to business friends of former President Jacob Zuma, the Guptas, had no contracts with state power utility Eskom. Brown maintains, however, that she was misled by Eskom officials, and the Public Protector has given President Cyril Ramaphosa 14 days to take action against the minister. Let's take a look at this short insert.
The minister is 100% clear on this one. People from Eskom had given her wrong information. We don't know if it was willful or what, but clearly it was wrong information, because for a long time this company has been saying that we did not make any payments to Trillion because we did not have a contract with them. But ultimately it turned out that actually Eskom, it is true that we did not have a contract with Trillion, but somehow we made payments to them. And that information was given to the minister to say that we didn't make any payments, so which ultimately turned out to be untrue. So which is why the minister, after she had received that new information, the correct information this time, she asked the old board of Eskom to take action against those involved. They were suspended, and as I speak to you now, they have resigned from Eskom.
In essence, Eskom is the one who tells me what the answer is, because I don't run Eskom. I'm the shareholder representative. So I send the questions to the company, and the company then sends the answers back to me. And Eskom then clearly have misled me in the process.
Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown there. But, Shawnee Makari, I think it is common knowledge now, if one has been following the parliamentary inquiry into the affairs at Eskom as well, that the minister was indeed misled. The evidence seems to point in that direction, that she was given misleading information. But the question then remains, what did she do once she found out that she had been allowed to perjure herself in Parliament as a result of being misled by Eskom executives? She did absolutely nothing.
Absolutely, and it points to a bigger problem, that of poor leadership, because clearly she's allowed a culture where people feel they could do something like this and get away with it. How many other things has she been lied to, which she gave to the public as that we've accepted as fact? So it's not an excuse. She should fall by a sword and say, you know what, clearly I'm not fit for this position, because you have allowed that kind of culture to mushroom under your watch. you're not fit for that position. Yes, it's true that she was lied to, but how did we get to that point? It's because people were able to operate, and not the issue of accountability was never really a big issue under her watch. And as a result, she's allowed for this sort of thing to actually come to bite her on the back.
Going back to that earlier point of leaders with integrity, she was made to perjure herself, and yet she does absolutely nothing to those who were responsible for that. What does that say about Lynn Brown?
Yeah, there's a lot happening at Eskom, and there's a lot happening that involves her, Lynn Brown. There's a litany of stories of her involvement in the maladministration and the sort of irregularities that we've seen there at Eskom. And so, I mean, for her to say that I was misinformed is simply her saying that it's a concession that I've failed at my duty, and I think that what really comes to play here is that the environment was so ripe for people to do whatever they could do because the minister turned a blind eye. Everything that we've seen in the state capture inquiry in Parliament, where we saw Anaj Singh, Machela Koko and others testify and counter-testimony, etc., it shows an environment where the main shareholder, which is the Ministry of Public Enterprises, not paying attention. And that's what happened. And this is basically how state institutions were collapsed and ridden with the whole state capture and other corruption, is when ministers looked away. That's what we see the accusation against the now finance minister, Malusi Gigaba, and other ministers as well, is you open the door and you look away.
Was it a matter of not looking away, or was it a matter of dealing with forces that were much more superior than the power that you yourself wield in that position?
I think it's quite possible that she was obviously under, some undue influence to operate in a particular way or to look the other way. Be that as it may, if you're a person of integrity, shouldn't you resign nevertheless? But she didn't. Again, it's about the politics of the stomach. So they decide to stay on and rather, tarnish their name in the process, which is what she's done. So, there's an opportunity, Minister Lynn Brown. Walk away. Maybe you might be able to salvage your name sometime in the future.
Well, let's see if she listens to Shoni Makari. But Malusi Gigaba finding himself in a similarly unenviable position, where he has found to have allegedly, lied under oath with regard to the Fireblade aviation story. Now, that's an interesting one. And this is a story, the most interesting part of the story that I go back to is when the Guptas tried to get stuff through that terminal at OR Tambo, and there was a green suitcase, a now infamous green suitcase that contained some precious stones, shall we say. And what happened to that? Because I'm curious, what happened beyond that?
Yeah, it sort of fell away, actually. We really did. We haven't really followed up to see what that was, but it definitely brought to light a huge spat over the Oppenheimer family, and we know their roles in their sort of influence in pre-democracy, South Africa, and then also the Gupta family on the one hand. Basically, it's a private VVIP terminal where very rich people can sort of land there, and then the customs would be there. And in terms of a business perspective, I think people have welcomed it. But now the politics that has gotten into this case, and now we see the court case. But if you break it down and you move the businesses and the interests and the people involved, and you look at what the essence of that judgment and what the public protector said about Lynn Brown is that ministers are sleeping on the job because it stems back to an argument we've previously heard in other cases that I just signed off. I didn't really read. In the public broadcaster, we've seen that happen before with communications ministers, etc. And so it's a simple case of sleeping on the job in the sense that Malusi Gigaba is now saying that I didn't lie under oath. I asked for information. Now the new Home Affairs Minister is appealing the case, but it's really a situation where there's no follow through. There's no a minister taking charge of an issue, and also I think it contributes to the fact that there was so much of political volatility over the last few years, the Home Affairs Department has had 3 ministers in under 2 years. So that kind of thing will need, people are now looking to this new South Africa to say, how much of it will people take control of issues and really own those issues? You know, if you talk about the mining charter, for example, where Musibenzi Zwane has said something, the president says something else. So I think that is where those cracks have allowed this kind of deviation from the law, in the case of Lynn Brown, in the case of the Home Affairs Department. And so really a serious conversation needs to happen about just stability in the departments and ministers acting like the CEOs of those ministries, and taking full charge of everything that happens in those institutions.
Well, he says, she says is where it's at right now. Shawnee, thanks so much for coming through, and Kanita, and unfortunately that's all we have time for this morning, and we're going to have to park it there. And of course next week we'll be back with another edition of Media Monitor, and looking forward to it. You have a blessed day from myself and the production team.